Pesach is coming, obviously, since you're selling your chametz. That's a sure sign. And of course, one of the big theme of Pesach is the Exodus from Egypt. And the Exodus from Egypt is replete with miracles. The coming out of Egypt was itself a miracle. No slave, not even a single slave, ever escaped, was ever able to escape from Egypt. And here an entire people walked out. So the event itself was a miracle. What led up to it was 10 plagues, each one of them a miracle. Then there was the splitting of the sea, which was kind of the ultimate miracle. So miracles is very much the theme of Pesach. But we need to understand a little bit deeper, a little bit better, what exactly is a miracle. Because if we approach it from a very simple, black and white perspective, why is a miracle different from non-miracle? If we believe that God created the world and runs the world and is the master of the world and is therefore able to perform miracles by changing nature on occasion, then why don't we also believe that everything that happens, even the non-miracles, are really miracles? If God created the world, well, then everything is a miracle. So what's not a miracle? If the sun comes up in the morning, it's a miracle. So we need a definition for what makes a miracle a miracle. Now, obviously, creation itself is an unnatural event, because creation means creating nature. So creation means that before nature existed, God existed and decided to create nature. So creating nature is not a natural phenomenon. In other words, nature did not create itself. So it is not a natural event, because a natural event seemingly means an event caused by nature. Isn't that what it means? If it's a natural event, it's an event caused by nature. I guess sometimes we think a natural event means a common event, a familiar event. But by strict definition, a natural event means an event caused by nature. There are laws of nature, and those laws cause things to happen. So when the law of nature causes something to happen, it's not a miracle. So when you drop the cup and it falls down, gravity, so they say, it caused the cup to fall. So when gravity causes the cup to fall, then the falling of the cup is not a miracle, because it was caused by nature. What then would be a miracle? Something that happens caused by God, by something above nature, outside of nature. So a miracle is an unnatural event. But if God creates nature, then why isn't nature itself also a miracle? In fact, God creates the world and all the laws of nature not only one time at the beginning of creation, but He creates it constantly. So using the analogy of the cup, why is it if you throw the cup across the room, it'll fly for a while, but then it will stop flying, it will return back to the earth, it will crash? What is the explanation? Why doesn't it continue to fly? The explanation of gravity is not sufficient. Gravity doesn't allow cups to move at all, but you were able to overcome that. and you cause the cup to fly across the room. Now, once it's flying already, what stops it? There's got to be something besides gravity which you've already overcome. So the explanation that gravity pulls it down, that's not a good explanation. The reason it falls is because you didn't push it or throw it hard enough. Right? You threw it just hard enough to travel 30 feet, but not more than that. So when your push ends, fades, then gravity takes over again. But if you could throw it a little harder, it would travel further. If you could throw it very hard, theoretically it could travel forever. And yet we see that no matter how many times you throw the cup over and over and over, nothing changes. The cup does not get any better at flying through the air. And why is that? Because there is no potential in the cup for flying. So even while the cup is flying through the air, because you threw it, you can't really call it a flying cup. It's not a flying cup. It's not any different than any other cup. Even while it's flying, it's not a flying cup. It's a thrown cup, not a flying cup. How about if you keep throwing it for 10 years, every single day, twice a day? Will it start to fly? Will it learn to fly? Not at all. So would it be correct to say, as you see the cup flying through the air, would it be correct to say that it has acquired some new talent? After all, until you threw it, it didn't fly. Now it's flying. That wouldn't be correct at all, because it's not flying. It's being flown. See, and it's not the same as when you're in an airplane, 30,000 feet above the ground. Are you flying, or are you sitting still inside a plane that's flying? So when they call you a frequent flyer, that's not technically correct, because you're not a flyer. You don't fly. You're sitting in a plane that's flying, but you're just sitting still. You're not doing anything. You're not a flying person. That's silly. Of course you're not a flying person. But the cup is flying. The plane is flying. Why don't we call the cup a flying cup? Or even the airplane a flying bird? It's not flying. It's being flown. And that's why if it runs out of gas, it's in big trouble. Why? Because the gas pushes it. It doesn't fly. It is flown by a power stronger than gravity. But if that power stops, this same aircraft that has flown millions of miles over the last couple of years, it can do nothing. It can't move. In the same way, when God created the world, like God shoved the world into existence. He shoves it into existence. So now it's existing, right? No, it's shoved into existence. So as long as God shoves, it continues to exist. If God stops, the world can't exist any more than a cup can fly. But you see cups flying all the time in certain homes. In certain homes, there are cups flying all the time. But they're not flying cups. So the world has existed for a long time, but it's not an existing world. It's being existed. There's a force that causes it to be, but it doesn't be. it can't be. So, if God not only created the world, but is creating the world and giving everything existence, and without that there would be nothing, then why isn't the sun a miracle? Not just the setting or the rising. The existence of the sun is a miracle. The existence of the earth is a miracle. Our existence, everything is a miracle. So how do we distinguish from a miraculous event to a natural event? What is the difference? Over time, our definition or our appreciation of miracles has changed. Of course, people used to think that childbirth was a miracle. We found out that there are laws of nature that govern even that. So although we still like to call it the miracle of birth, but we know that there are laws of nature. So subjectively, or historically, things that we couldn't explain were dismissed as miracles. When we finally learned to explain them, stopped being a miracle. Somebody was once visiting with a Rebbe, and he had been thinking about something, and the Rebbe read his thoughts and told him exactly what he was thinking. He said, "That's a miracle." And the Rebbe said, "No, it's not. The ability to read thoughts is not a miracle. It's a sensitivity. Maybe it's an extra sensitive sensitivity, but it's not a miracle. It's within the laws of nature." Would anybody have believed that traveling to the moon would not be a miracle? Today we realize that it's not a miracle. You push the right buttons, you eat the right foods, you take Tang with you, yeah, you can get to the moon. Even a monkey can go to the moon. It's not a miracle. So what then is a miracle? A miracle is not defined by what causes it. A miracle is defined by what it causes. Everything comes from God. Everything. No leaf moves from one place to another in an autumn day without a divine plan causing it to move. Nothing. Nothing happens because of a law of nature. There's no such thing. Nature causes nothing. Does medicine really cure? Antibiotics really cures? No, it doesn't. Because for every law of nature that helps us understand and explain the observable phenomenon, we have more questions than answers. And ultimately, when you ask the simple question, why, you eventually run up against a brick wall. Nobody knows. We can't explain it. It's just the way it is. Why does the cup fall? Gravity. What is gravity? Well, we don't really know. Why is there gravity? We don't know. We barely know what it is, and we're not even sure about that. Why it is? Don't know. So every law of nature is an irrational law. Maybe that's why they call it a law, not a concept, not a principle, just a law. E equals mc squared. Why? I don't know why. Look how long it took just to figure out that it does. Now you want to know why? We don't know why. We don't know why anything. Because the laws of nature have no explanation. So after all is said and done, in describing the laws of nature, we still don't know why anything causes anything. So cause and effect is still a mystery. Because in truth, it's all a miracle. The wind blows the leaf across the street. A wind blows leaves? Yeah, of course. Of course. Why? We don't know. There's no explanation. So the wind is stronger than the leaf, and therefore it moves it. If the leaf were heavier, the wind wouldn't move it. Why? We don't know why. So that's not an explanation, that's simply an observation. The wind moves little things, but it doesn't move big things. You need a big wind to move big things. We don't know why. Cause and effect is still a mystery. So, what would distinguish a miracle from a non-miracle? If everything comes from God, and everything is a miraculous process, what is a miracle? The miraculous processes that God uses daily, constantly, continuously, from the beginning of creation till today, those miraculous processes are called nature. Processes that God does not use often, only on rare occasion, those are called miracles. But they're both miraculous. They're both divine. They are both beyond the scope of nature. Natural law cannot cause anything. So whatever happens, happens from a divine source. It happens by divine design, by divine intervention, as the insurance companies call it. An act of God. Everything is an act of God. But the miracle is a rare and different act of God. So why is a miracle more exciting than a non-miracle? The same God, same miraculous process. Only this one you haven't seen yet. God has a few more tricks up his sleeve you haven't seen yet. But it's all the same thing. It's his trick. He does it all. And he does one that you haven't yet seen. So is it just the surprise? Something new? Is that what makes it a miracle? For some people who live on a very high level of existence, everything is a miracle. Really is. They really see everything in its miraculous form. To them, existence is a miracle, the sun is a miracle, the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, the movement of a leaf, everything is a miracle. And so to them, a miracle is not any different. Then there are people who live on a completely opposite level. Nothing to them is a miracle, because everything comes from God. So they are so accustomed to divine behavior. Why is a miracle any different? Everything is the same. So the splitting of the sea, why, that's a miracle. And the running of the sea is not a miracle. So when the sea flows, it's a miracle. When it splits, that's a miracle too. But they're not different. They're the same. So there are people who live on that level. There are certain of the sages in the Talmud who are described as accustomed to miracles, because their whole existence, everything to them was miraculous. And there's that famous story. One of the sages, his daughter, was preparing for Shabbos, and she lit the candles, and of course it was an oil candle, not a wax candle. And then, a few minutes into Shabbos, she realized that by accident, instead of putting oil into the lamp, she had put vinegar into the lamp. And she was very upset that the candle would go out in a few minutes, because vinegar doesn't burn. And then it would be dark in the house for Shabbos. So she was very upset. And she came to her father, and she was crying, and she said, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I thought it was oil." So her father said, "He who tells oil to burn will tell the vinegar to burn." And so it did. The vinegar burnt all Shabbos. So the Kabbalistic explanation is not just that this was a very holy man and he decreed that the vinegar should burn, so it did. I mean, that would be fine. Holy people throughout the Torah, throughout all of history, were able to perform miracles. So he performed a miracle and he caused the vinegar to burn. But then his explanation would not be true or actual. He who tells oil to burn will tell the vinegar to burn. What do those words mean? He who tells oil to burn means oil doesn't burn. Somebody has to tell it. Not he who told oil to burn, like at the beginning of creation. No. He who tells oil to burn. Every time oil burns, it's because God is telling it to burn. So the daughter is upset. She was supposed to put oil into the candle, and she put vinegar into the candle, and it's a disaster. So her father says to her, and if you had put oil into the candle, what would happen? It would burn. Why? Because there's something about oil? It's not because of the oil. It's because he tells oil to burn. Well, when you make a mistake and you need light for Shabbos, so he who tells oil to burn will tell the vinegar to burn. It's all the same to him. In other words, telling the oil to burn is just as much a miracle as telling the vinegar to burn. So if it's all the same to God anyway, so this week he'll tell the vinegar to burn. Why not? A miracle is what it causes, not what causes it. The miraculous events of everyday life don't cause us to notice God. They don't have that effect. If we're very sensitive, you're watching a beautiful sunset, you're moved by the beauty of it. Are you really recognizing the Creator's hand? Are you recognizing He who tells the sun to set? There are people who are moved to some degree. He who created this whole thing, past tense. And you're grateful to God for having created such a beautiful world. But that was a long time ago. And even if you are moved by the fact that God at this very moment is creating the sun and causing it to set, and you are, impressed? In awe? Grateful? Moved to tears? It's still not a miracle. But if you see the sun set, and it suddenly occurs to you that God wants you to do a mitzvah, you really should do it. That's a miracle. A miracle is an event that reveals God's role in your life. Nature reveals God's role daily, constantly, but it doesn't affect your life. So what is a miracle? A miracle is a moment in which God makes himself so obvious that it changes your behavior. Nature is God doing his thing, but his presence is not so noticeable that it's going to change your life. It can inspire you, it can move you to appreciation, but it's not going to change your life. In other words, if God split the sea and the people walk through it but don't sing the song of praise, then it wasn't a miracle. You say, well, the water was standing still. Yeah, amazing. Strange. Who'd have thunk it? Never saw anything like it in my life. But it's not a miracle. Not it's not a miracle because I don't think it's a miracle. It really isn't. Because if it didn't move me to change my behavior, then it's not a miracle. It's another one of those things that God does. And he does them all the time. and they don't affect my life, they don't change my behavior, and neither does this. So the Torah tells us that after the splitting of the sea, and after the 10 plagues in Egypt, and after the miracle of the Exodus, all the nations in the Middle East were in awe of the Jewish people and in awe of God, except Amalek. And that's why Amalek has to be destroyed, because they're just incorrigible. No amount of miracles is going to get to them. So Hasidus explains, what was it about Amalek? How could he not be impressed with the miracles? And Hasidus says, Amalek's argument, Amalek's thinking was, God does everything. He created the world. That's much more impressive than tampering with the sea, which he created. So what are you so impressed by? That God can perform a miracle? Of course he can perform a miracle. Big deal. If you were God, you'd perform miracles. In other words, for God, this is nothing. So why are you impressed? And although there's a bit of a logic to that argument, it's an unholy position. It's an unholy frame of mind. The fact that God finds it easy to split seas is not a reason for you not to be moved, because you can't. I don't know what a good example. You watch Willie Mays make an incredible catch with his back to home plate, and you say, well, all right, he's, Willie Mays. You're not impressed. Because, look, he's a professional ball player. He's good at what he does, so he made a good catch. No, people pay to see him do what he does because they can't. So when you see something you could never do, you're supposed to be moved. The fact that the one who does it easily, is that a reason to be less impressed? Or more impressed? He even makes it look easy. To him it really is easy. So are you less impressed or more impressed? So as far as Amalek was concerned, did a miracle happen at the sea? No miracle happened, because it didn't affect their behavior. They remained unchanged. So to them, no miracle happened. The fact that the sea split? I don't know. Let me ask Amalek, how do you explain this? How did the sea split? I don't know. There things happen. We can't explain everything. Maybe someday we'll figure it out. But how many times do things happen we can't explain and we dismiss it? How many times does a doctor see miraculous cures that he cannot explain? Doesn't change his behavior. Yeah, there are times when there is spontaneous remission. And that's not a miracle? Well, we don't know. So if we don't know, and you're the professional, and you went to school, and you're trained, and you're the expert, and something happens that you don't know, that's not impressive? That's not inspiring? Nah, it's one of those things. To him, there's no miracle. To the person going home from the hospital, a miracle happened. I guess anytime you get out of the hospital, it's a miracle. So what is a miracle? God created the world in such a way that although everything that happens is divine, and he is intimately involved in every process, in every event, in every movement, in every breath, yet his presence goes unnoticed. That's how he created the world. I will take care of you personally, intimately, constantly, but I'm not going to make myself obvious. I will be there, I will be everything, and you're not going to know unless you care to know. So God created the world in such a way that nothing happens without him, and yet when these things happen, we don't notice the him. We notice only the event. That in Kabbalah is called tzimtzum. the contraction and the concealment of God's presence, meaning God's involvement. What is a miracle? A miracle is another one of God's involvements, another event caused by an act of God or divine intervention, only for some reason God doesn't conceal himself. He lets himself show in this event. And that's why it moves people to change their behavior. So the Hebrew word for miracle is nes, which is also the Hebrew word for flag or banner. What is a flag or a banner? There are things you don't notice from a distance. If you were looking from far away, you wouldn't see it. So they raise a flag. A flag means an attention getter. You could overlook this thing, so we raise a flag over it, or a banner, or a sign, so that you don't overlook it, that it catches your attention, and that you do become aware of this thing you wouldn't be aware of otherwise. Now, if somebody raises a banner but nobody can see it, it's not a banner. Somebody hangs up a sign but nobody can read it. It's not a sign. So if you do something to draw people's attention but nobody notices, your attention-getting skills need a little honing. So when God performs a miracle, it's the same kind of act. Telling the vinegar to burn is exactly the same as telling the oil to burn. And that's why some people will say everything's a miracle. The oil burning is a miracle, just like the vinegar burning. And some people will say the vinegar burning is no more of a miracle than the oil burning. It's all the same. But that's for people who are very sensitive on a constant basis. For most people, oil burning does not keep you up at night. It doesn't shock you. It doesn't draw your attention to he who told the oil to burn. But when vinegar burns, your mind, your awareness is drawn not to the vinegar or to the fire, but to he who told vinegar to burn, and you can't get over it. And you start keeping kosher. And you start doing mitzvahs. Why? Because you saw vinegar burning. Why didn't you start keeping kosher when you saw the oil burning? Oh, oil always burns. So now we'll understand what the word nature means. Nature doesn't mean the law of nature caused it to happen. That's simply not correct. There is no law that causes things to happen. There is a law of sequence of events. But what's causing that? Not the law. He is causing it. Yet, it doesn't inspire us. Why? Because it's natural. Natural literally means familiar, habitual. We are habituated. We are accustomed to oil burning. And that's why it doesn't draw our attention to the Creator. The Hebrew word for nature is the same as the Hebrew word for drowned, submerged. Tova b'yam means he drowned in the ocean. God's presence in these miraculous events is submerged. It's like underwater. It's all going on, but on the surface you can't see it. And what causes us not to see it? Habit. You get used to something, you stop noticing. So it's the deadening effects of repetition or habit. Whereas nes means the same kind of an event, but an event that catches your attention. It is not submerged. God's presence is not hidden in this event. It is there to catch your attention. God is raising a banner saying, for the moment, I want you to notice me. Then we'll go back to habit. But right now I want your attention. So we'll understand a little bit better. We thank God and we praise God and we're eternally grateful to God, for taking us across the sea at the splitting of the sea. Why did he put the sea there in the first place? If everything comes from him, then every time he solves a problem for us, he's also the one who caused it. So when a person has a miraculous escape from some danger, well, where did the danger come from? Who put me in danger? He who put me in danger also got me out of danger. So what's the point? I can't get over it. God came and saved me from drowning when my boat hit an iceberg. Why did it hit an iceberg? Because if it doesn't hit the iceberg and you make it safely across the ocean, you won't notice. So what is a miracle? A miracle means God wants your attention. That was just to get your attention. Usually, he leaves it to you. Seek me, and you will find. But I'm not going to come with an alarm clock waking you up. It's your job. You find God. You get to know God. And that has to come from within the natural order. But now and then God says, you haven't written lately. I haven't heard from you lately. I got to shake you up a little bit and remind you that we're still in business together. And that's what the miracle is. So the miracle actually means God doing the same event, but without the tzimtzum, without that concealment. There are times, the most noble way of giving charity is to give to a poor person without the poor person knowing that it's coming from you. That's how God creates the world. He gives you life constantly without your knowing that it's coming from him, so that you could, if you choose to, take full credit for your own existence. You're not forced to be grateful or to acknowledge or to be humbled by the fact that your life is not yours. It's a constantly repeating gift. The gift that keeps giving. But on occasion, God says, I know this is really your job, and it's supposed to come from you, that you're supposed to seek me out and find me, and so on and so forth, but right now I need your attention. So he raises the flag, and you can't miss it. Unless you're a mullik, then nothing's going to help. Which leads us to one final thought. A miracle is God calling our attention. And then what? Well, obviously, once God gets your attention, you're not going to behave the way you used to. Once you recognize God's presence in your life, you have to become a little more godly. If your very pious grandmother moves into your house, you got to keep kosher. You can't, how else are you going to do this? Once God comes into your conscious awareness, you got to start acting more Jewish. So there's a benefit right there. Any person who went through a near-death experience becomes religious. Because you can't ignore it anymore. You're suddenly aware of holier, more awesome things than your own daily life. So you got to bring in some awesome stuff to match. But let's use the example of the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea, which is Pesach. As much as we celebrate Pesach with all the intensity and with all the effort and with all the attention to detail and so on, Pesach is only an introduction. It's only a preparation for Shavuos. We left Egypt not because we didn't like it there. People can get used to anything. We got used to being in Egypt. We got used to the slavery. You can get used to anything. That's called nature. If it's repeated often enough, it becomes natural. A slave is a slave. To him, that's natural. He doesn't think of being free. He can't think of being free. That's not his nature or habit. And we see how many times in the desert the Jews decided to go back to Egypt or regretted having left Egypt. So it's not that we left Egypt because we hated it there. We left Egypt because we had to get to Mount Sinai. That was the purpose. So when God causes all these miracles to happen, so that we sing his praises at the splitting of the sea, at the crossing of the sea, and we thank him profusely in the Haggadah all night long for taking us out of Egypt, and all that was just to get your attention. Now that God has our attention, what's the next step? God is saying, now that I have your attention, now that we understand each other, come to Mount Sinai. I've got something to tell you. I've got a job for you. Should you choose to accept, it's a mission impossible, but somebody's got to do it. So that is the nature of miracles, so to speak. Somebody asked me once, I had a very close call with a car over a bridge. It was slippery, and he was hanging with one wheel over the... He says, was that a miracle? I said, obviously not. Because if you're asking, then God did not get your attention. A miracle is when that smog that conceals God's presence lifts for a moment and you can see clearly. And on a clear day, where does that expression come from? On a clear day, you can see forever. On a clear day, you see infinity. You see God. The only reason we don't see him is because the days are not clear. Pesach is a clear day. And on a clear day, we see forever. On Pesach, we suddenly see our past. We see our future. We see infinity. We see everything. On Pesach, we are sane, which will explain why people, many people, who don't keep any of the commandments all year long, but Pesach, they got to go to a Seder. Got to eat some matzah. They eat it at the wrong times. Sometimes it's the wrong matzah. They didn't read the label. The label specifically says not for Passover use, but it's a matzah, a matzah's a matzah. They don't know the difference. So they're eating a non-kosher matzah. They're eating it on the afternoon before Pesach. They might as well eat it the day before because it's not Pesach yet, which, by the way, is a very important thing. The first Seder cannot begin until nightfall. Otherwise, you're eating matzah on Hanukkah. It wouldn't make any difference. In order to eat matzah on Pesach, you got to eat it when Pesach begins, not before. And how many Jews will sit at their Seder a week from now? They're going to sit at their Seder at 5 o'clock Monday afternoon, and it's not Pesach. But they're going to eat matzah. Because you got to eat matzah. Why? Because Pesach makes you see clearly. Well, not clearly enough. Doesn't make you read the label carefully enough, or the clock. But other than that, Pesach does something to us. It's a moment of sobriety. We sober up on Pesach. We realize who we are. And that's the miracle of it. Rosh Hashanah doesn't get that much attention the way Pesach does. Because Rosh Hashanah, we don't know what the miracle is. What's the miracle? Because God created the whole world. Well, but what does that mean? That means he created nature, so everything's natural. God created nature by concealing himself. And so Rosh Hashanah doesn't move people so deeply as Pesach does. Because Pesach, God uncovered himself. Well, then you can't miss it. Hanukkah, God made himself visible. Can't ignore it. Shavuos, what happened? Nothing happened. Oh, God spoke. Yeah, but what changed? Water didn't turn to blood. Frogs didn't come out of the woodworks. I mean, what happened? So Shavuos kind of gets ignored. Pesach doesn't get ignored. But it's important to know that Pesach gets your attention only because God wants to talk to you on Shavuos. Problem is, he waited 50 days. See, that violates all the rules of good public, I don't know what the word is. Huh? Well, yeah. Once you get people's attention, you got to close the deal quickly. People have a very short memory. I remember in camp, you got to get the whole camp to quiet down because you got to make an announcement. You got to tell them what to do, where to go, whatever. You got 300 kids, and it's not easy to get them quiet. And you see these guys, they get up there, they scream, they threaten, everybody quiet, quiet down. And everybody gets quiet, and then they talk to each other about what was it, and a second later, they've lost it. They got to start all over again. Quiet down. You don't do that. The minute they're quiet, start your message. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it all over again. So God waited 50 days, which is why Shavuos is ignored. Got to do it again. Got to have a miracle a little closer to Shavuos. But the ultimate miracle is that we notice. That's really the miracle. The miracle is that we pay attention. That when God does make himself visible, we don't overlook it. We don't explain it away. We can. You can explain anything away. But we don't. When God makes himself visible, we become good. Which proves that the only reason we're not good is because he's not visible. So our misbehavior is never spiteful. When he's there, we're good. As the Berditchever said to God, you want to test us to see what our choices would be, and you give us freedom of choice. But how do you give us freedom of choice? You put evil all over the streets of Berditchev, and you write a book about goodness and holiness. Well, come on, what kind of deal is that? Do it the other way. Put all holiness and goodness on the streets of Berditchev, and we'll have freedom of choice because you'll give us a book on evil. Then you'll see how good we'll be. So, when God puts goodness on the streets of Berditchev, we are very good. So the reason we're sometimes not so good, it's because there is no holiness on the streets of Berditchev. On the streets, there's tzimtzum. On the streets, there's nature. Of course, we're expected to be good in spite of nature. All right, that's a challenge. But don't be surprised if we fail. So the real miracle is that 3,000 years after the Exodus from Egypt, millions of Jews will sit down to a Seder again, 3,000 years later. That's the ultimate miracle. God without Jews is not a miracle. And Jews without God is not a miracle. But when Jews and God get together, All sorts of things happen. That really, truly is the ultimate miracle. There are Israelis who serve in the army, and after the intense, pressure-filled experience, they need to blow off some steam, they need to relax. So where do they go? To the Far East. Thousands. And they don't go there looking for a minyan. You don't go to Bangkok looking for a shul. And yet, when they discover that there's a Chabad program that invites them to a Seder, when they came there to go hiking, mountain climbing, and experiencing all sorts of wild and crazy things, and then, to their surprise, they find out that there's a Seder that welcomes them. Thousands of them leave their hiking trails, take off their backpacks, and sit down to a Seder. That is a miracle. That's the ultimate miracle. Because that shows that God got our attention. We don't always acknowledge it, but He got our attention. And even when we have no idea and no intention, people go without even realizing it's going to be Pesach while you're there. That's not even on their calendar. That's not their concern. They're going to get away. And then they see a notice or somebody tells them, we're going over to the Seder. Thousands of them. Everywhere. That's the miracle of Pesach, and that's the miracle of the Jewish people.